Hi, and welcome to a Postmodern Review. I'm Jake Eden. The Office has become a bit of a modern-day rite of passage. And honestly, if you haven't seen it yet, grow up and join the rest of us. But seriously, I think most of us would consider the best parts of our stories to be those times we spend outside of work. Evenings spent with friends and family, or dedicated to hobbies, our weekend adventures, or vacations spent far from home. We tell our young ones to cherish their childhoods free from labor, and we all strive for those golden years of retirement. For most of us, our jobs seem to be an inconvenience required for survival in a system of capital and trade that we unfairly inherited. It's all just a consequence of living in a more civilized time. However, this way of seeing ourselves leaves a rather incomplete sort of canoed-out vision of what our lives really are. Our time spent at work is where most of us are at our best, whether we like to admit it or not. We kind of have to be, right? Otherwise we'd be replaced by someone else. What if I said that the time we spend at work is our true life story? Think of it this way. Professionals identify themselves by their profession. Asking a person what they do is not only appropriate, but an expected part of meeting someone new. Many people meet their spouse or best friend at work. For some, work is the only place they socialize. And love them or hate them, our coworkers, for the most part, are pretty reliable. They're by our sides day after day. Now, I will admit that critiquing The Office from a postmodern point of view was challenging for me. I, like others, have a many-year relationship with this show, and I knew it was a postmodern work, but I struggled to put my finger on exactly how. At first, I classified it as brutal realism, but obviously that's wrong. I nearly gave up until the answer came to me in a flash just a few months ago. It's the camera. Because of course it is, right? Let me explain what I mean. Like other postmodern pieces, The Office uses some specific literary and cinematic techniques to create an effective flow of tension, this time in an effort to pull fiction out into the real world. The techniques that we will be examining here are pastiche and fourth wall manipulation, a term that I made up to describe the act of bending, stretching, cutting through, or outright breaking the fourth wall. Also a term I made up just for The Office's particular treatment of the camera. Then we'll finish up by taking a look at the final season for a tale of two endings. Let's get started. Let's begin, as usual, by taking a look at the setting and presentation of the show. The Office takes place in the real-life towns of Scranton or Slough, placing them firmly on the reality side of our spectrum ranging from fiction to reality. However, Dunder Mifflin, or Wernham Hogg, the iconic fictional paper company, sit far on the fiction side of the spectrum. Although not as far as some other fictional workplaces, they do sell paper after all. Already we can start to feel the tug of tension moving toward reality, pulling these companies and their fictional employees along with them. The presentation of The Office is where the real postmodern magic occurs, because it's presented in a mockumentary style. Here is a good opportunity to look at the difference between parody and pastiche. The Office distinguishes itself from being a parody because the characters and storylines are original-ish. The Office isn't a parody of any particular documentary, rather it's a pastiche made in the style of and following most of the cinematic rules of a documentary or reality show. Pastiche. Alright, now that we've established that, we can dig deeper and see how pastiche functions here along with a realistic setting to create an effective flow of tension firmly in the direction of reality. Documentaries are supposed to be about real life, and so are reality shows, hence the name. In the documentary, the director has some aspect of a subject that they feel is interesting enough to expose. However, real life is sometimes squirmy and unpredictable and often inexplicable, so the director is forced to lay a narrative on top of the chaos in order to give it stability and make it easier to understand. The mockumentary, on the other hand, has kind of the opposite task to achieve. If you notice, mockumentaries tend to expose aspects of life that really no one is interested in. Things like how local government works or how companies buy paper. This is where subversion of reality begins. This is also where the moccumentary's unique task begins. After all, real life can also be mundane and predictable and boring, so the director here has to force instability under real life stability using a fictional story that's subject to imagination in order to make things more believably chaotic. The Office was supposed to be a sterile educational experience appropriate for all ages. What The Office actually became was what must have been every director's dream. Through the beautiful mess that is Michael Scott or David Brent, a true diamond in the rough emerged. The show comes together like spun yarn, with some of its threads being made from reality and some being made from fiction. Over time, the show twists and twists these threads together tighter and tighter. They add more threads at some points and take away others at other points until they all work together indistinguishably. Of course, these threads can be separated and teased apart if need be, like I'm doing here, but doing so would certainly compromise the integrity of the braid. Keeping that tight braid is integral to accommodate The Office's strong flow of tension. Fourth wall manipulation. Adding to the strength of The Office's flow of tension is its manipulation of the fourth wall. Few other works of fiction pay quite the same kind of attention to the camera as this show does. Certainly, breaking the fourth wall has a long and storied tradition, especially with actors. The mockumentary style, and particularly The Office on the other hand, takes it several steps in a different direction. Normally, a documentary is supposed to be a view into a room through the smallest possible hole in the fourth wall. We as viewers are supposed to be witnessing life, not necessarily watching a story. The camera should be invisible, for the most part. The camera of The Office, however, manages not only to be not invisible, the characters acknowledge it, talk to it, nod to it, play to it, wink at it, avoid it, hide from it, bump it, bash it, straight up stampede over it. Heck, at one point it even pops out and becomes a playable character in the narrative in the form of the boom guy anyways. They both loved it and hated it. Instead of drilling a tiny pinhole through which the camera could monitor the workers of Dunder Mifflin or Wernham Hogg, they pushed the camera into the fourth wall so hard that it started to stretch until it becomes obvious that the camera is in the room, both to the characters and to the audience, kind of like that scene in Nightmare on Elm Street where Freddy comes through the wall. Putting so much focus on the fourth wall has the contrasting effect of making it dissolve away. Without it, the distance between the characters and the audience gets greatly reduced and is further foreshortened by the brutally realistic setting of a mid-sized commercial office building. Even people who have never lived in Scranton or Slough or worked for a paper company per se will still be able to recognize the politics and personalities at play. It's an inside joke that anyone can be a part of. This open invitation to the audience puts extra pressure on the fictional characters to appear normal for fear of being judged by the audience, like any normal human being would do. This, of course, achieves the opposite effect, as they alter their behavior so much that they end up appearing insane. Just ask any reality TV star. Ian Malcolm once said, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, what you study, you change. The Office is a pretty good example of that. This relatability to the characters, coupled with the absurdity of their fiction, gives the show a manufactured sense of realism. The same manufactured sense of realism that reality shows achieve, by the way, but through an inverse version of the process. It's that manufactured sense of realism that makes the strong flow of tension created by The Office more palatable and so much more entertaining. Don't worry, that pain you're feeling in your brain right now, like I am, and that's called postmodernism. Self-reference. In order for The Office's deep-running self-reference to come full circle, the documentary had to be released in one form or another. While the US and UK versions both acknowledged that this happened within the narrative of the show, they did so in very different ways. First, we'll take a look at the UK version and see how their version contributes to the integrity of the braid of that spun yarn we talked about earlier. Then we'll take a look at the US version, which I think has some pretty serious shortcomings that work to undermine the integrity of the braid instead. The regular series of The Office UK ends with David Brent leaving Wernham Hogg in shame. A year later, 2 special episodes were released chronicling the lives of the characters after the events of the original show. As implied by the separation of these 2 events, that the version of the documentary that Brent refers to as a stitch-up is the only version of the events that exists, the same one that aired on the BBC back in 2001 and 2002. So, it's presumable that the very people with whom Brent interacts in the specials in 2003 were the same people watching The Office along with us a year ago on the BBC. To put that into perspective, let's look at the US version. Due to the nature of US television milking shows for way more than they're worth, they ended up with a problem. The Office, which originally aired on NBC, needed a way to justify a documentary made of over a decade worth of filming. To fix this problem, they decided to release The Office, an American workplace, on PBS within the fiction of the show. Both of these details are incompatible with reality. In the UK special episodes, Tim describes having to watch his own romantic endeavors that occurred in the original series alongside his family. In this version, it was possible that Martin Freeman and Tim Canterbury could have both watched the same episodes of The Office when they first released, just like everyone else. The US version changed that whole perspective in one action. Instead of a documentary unfolding over the course of many years, we ended up with the making of a documentary released to view on PBS, presumably in a truncated way, as The Office, an American workplace. It's as subtle a shift as going from assistant regional manager to assistant to the regional manager. Such shift in such a tight system can change the direction of the flow of tension quite abruptly. Allow me to clarify that I'm not implying that either of these shows is superior to the other, only that their different ways of handling this particular aspect of the narrative achieve different effects, for better or for worse. Conclusion. No matter which version of The Office you prefer, whether it's the one you work at or the one on TV, I think it can help us all to get through the day by remembering that we all have one thing in common: the need to make a living, the need to get out there and get messy with society. Perhaps just remembering that can help us realize some of the other things we have in common and allow us to stop focusing so much on what separates us. I think Tim said it best when he said, "If you turn off the camera, it's not an ending, is it? I'm still here. I'm still here. And so are you, and so am I, and so is everyone else listening to this after it stops." Consider your fellow man, because at the end of the day, we're all just shipmates on this big old cosmic vessel to nowhere. We might as well rely on each other, because no one else has a bigger stake in our success. That's it for this one. Hope you enjoyed, and thanks for listening.